So it's 6 o'clock and we're just about to start our webinar with GEM COVID-19 Crisis Online Learning Session. And we're really honored today to have perspectives from Italy and Spain. We have with us, well, first of all, let me introduce myself, I am Aileen Ionescu-Somers. I am the Executive Director of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. You'll find out exactly for those who do not know what that is in a moment, but I also have an excellent panel with me, Isidro de Pablo Lopez, who is joining us from GEM Spain. He's in Madrid. He's a professor in the Department of Business Organization at the Autonomous University of Madrid. And then we have two members of our GEM Italy team with us. It's Donato Jacobucci. He's professor of economics at the Marche Polytechnic University, and Diego Dada of GEM Italy. He's with he's the professor of economics at Marche Polytechnic University as well. So I'm really delighted to have you here. I can see that we have about 40, 50 participants. It's great to have you and to invite you. I'd like to actually, for those who do not know us very well, I know we have a bit of a loyal following by now. Some people know us, some people don't, but let me just introduce GEM, what it is. That's important that you know that. So if we could go to the next slide, this would be great. So GEM is a consortium of national country teams. Italy and Spain are represented here. But we have upwards of 50 teams that currently participate in our research. We associate with top academic institutions like the ones represented today, and our financing partners are mostly governments. And we carry out surveys. GEM, in fact, is the only global research source that collects data on entrepreneurship directly from individual entrepreneurs, and that's what makes us really special. GEM's Adult Population Survey provides an analysis on characteristics, motivations, and ambitions of individuals starting businesses, and we also track social attitudes towards entrepreneurship, which are really very important to track, especially during periods like the one we currently have. We also have a GEM National Expert Survey, which looks at the national context in which individuals start businesses. So the nature of our research is such that GEM tools and data are really unique, and they benefit different stakeholder groups, international organizations, as well as academics, and also governments, and many of the foundations and institutions that support entrepreneurship worldwide. We can go to the next slide. GEM actually began, it's 21 years old. It's had its coming of age, if you like, last year. But 21 years is a long time to be keeping data. We have 21 years of data. So GEM has actually surveyed through its national teams over 3 million adults in 114 economies across the globe. We do about 150,000 interviews a year, so that's a lot of interviews. And as I said, 50 economies participated in 2019. We work, in other words, with hundreds of specialists in entrepreneurship research and multiple academic and research institutions, as well as funding institutions. And this is really just to give you an idea of the credibility of what is going to be talked about today. So I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation. I actually almost have the impression of coming to people who are coming from the trenches of war. So Italy and Spain have been in a particularly difficult situation within Europe, probably on the sharp end of the really difficult consequences of this COVID-19 impact. And so, and also there is the fact that Italy and Spain were living a little bit with the fallout still of the financial crisis of 2008. So I wonder, Donato or Diego, I'll actually ask questions to the Italian team, and you can decide yourselves who will answer what. That's okay, either Donato or Diego. So who would like to cover the question on, just give us a quick overview on the 2008 financial crisis and the learning from Italy, just to kind of set the scene or the context for this current crisis. Who would like to handle that? Okay, Donato, you need to switch on your mic.
Which can you hear me now?
We hear you now.
Yes. Thank you. So, so good afternoon again to everybody from Italy. As you said, Aileen, Italy and Spain were among the countries in the EU more affected not only from the pandemic but also in economic terms. And this is because we share some similarities, for example, the importance of the tourism sector or the importance of small firms, which are particularly affected by the crisis. But as you mentioned, certainly, especially for Italy, this crisis is in some way connected to the previous one in 2009, because the Italian economy never fully recovered from the 2009 financial crisis. So we experienced during the last decade subsequent economic slowdowns and so Italy was the country within the Euro area with the lowest GDP growth in the last few years. And so the present crisis was just the final point of a situation of progressive slowdown, especially. And we will see also when we will look at the data, the GEM data about the entrepreneurial activity in comparing Italy and Spain, and you will see that also, yes, exactly. Thank you. That in the case, of course, both countries were very much affected by the 2009 crisis. But after that, you see in the last few years, and especially in 2019, Italy was already slowing down, and indeed, so that's why the present crisis affected very much the country in economic terms.
Okay, thank you very much for that overview. Could I come to you, Isidro, and maybe you have other things as the Spanish perspective to add to this? Please.
Well, yes, good afternoon to everyone. Until the COVID outbreak, Spain was also recovering from the 2008 crisis at a GNP growth rate above that of the EU and OECD average. So we're really doing very well despite some problems within the economy. You have seen the graphs before, and you could also see that the TIA is consistently growing, while necessity-driven entrepreneurship was declining year after year. So that was an optimistic situation. However, there are several key factors explaining how fragile our economic fabric is. On one side, our economy is highly dependent on a strategic sector sensitive to international prosperity, such as tourism, which is the case of Italy as well, which accounts for 13% of our GNP, the auto industry, which accounts for 10%, hostelry, 9.2%, and an increasing export-oriented industrial sector. We also have the problem, Donato mentioned, that our average company size is smaller than the average EU company. Yeah. And about half of the economic units are freelancers or individual entrepreneurs with a weak financial situation. These circumstances makes many businesses sensitive to short-term turmoil of any kind. We also have a very significant irregular economy, which becomes a heavy burden during bad times, especially when there is a drop in domestic consumption. All this together messed up into a perfect storm when the COVID pandemic hit us, stalling economic activity and provoking a 70% drop in new business creations and heavy job losses during the first weeks, first month after the lockdown. That means bad times ahead. Back to you, Aileen.
Yes, thanks, Isidro. Not quite the ideal circumstances to emerge into another crisis. You know, you've almost got a kind of overlap in crises in a sense, you know. Donato, could you tell us what are the characteristics of this crisis that make it different to any other? Donato or Diego, whichever.
Yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Aileen.
Thank you.
Well, I see a couple of pretty hard differences. I mean, first of all, the magnitude. We are talking about forecasts are talking about minus 9.2% in terms of decrease in GDP with respect to the 5% of the last crisis. And another difference is the way this crisis is affecting in a different magnitude the different sectors. I mean, the sector are hit in a very different way. If you can see the next slide. Next one. Okay, here. Okay, as Isidro and Donato were saying before, I mean, tourist sector is one of the most hard sector hit by the crisis, and this is what, as you can see, there are also other sectors which are positively affected by the crisis on the other side. For example, online commerce or retail grocery stores or food delivery. I mean, this is something peculiar of this crisis, and I think that it's a matter of differences that in terms of the impact of the lockdown and the differences in terms of the impact on the demand that differently affect these sectors. And what we can, another figure I can add, we have a figure about the first quarter in Italy about the new firms. So we can say something only about the number of new firms created in March, and so at the very beginning of the crisis, Italy closed down around the 10th of March, so 20 days in March were in the lockdown, and we can see a first drop in the new firm creation, about 40% drop. This is a first evidence of the impact on entrepreneurial activity.
Okay, and I mean, to go even deeper, what's the impact that you're observing on entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial ecosystems in Italy?
There are, when we think at the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Italy, also through the GEM survey, what you mentioned, especially the National Expert Survey, we have some weaknesses, structural weaknesses, especially when we think of the burden of the bureaucracy, or the problems in accessing the financial external finance for small firms. These are among the main weaknesses of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We hope that the reaction to this crisis will help overcoming some of these. Certainly, the immediate impact, as Diego was saying, on the entrepreneurial activity is very a big drop in new firm formation. and certainly will be also negative in the next months in terms of firms exiting, firms, as Isidro mentioned, exiting from the market. So at the same time, we will discuss maybe later on the measures that we are implementing, and within these measures there are some financial measures that may help addressing some of the weaknesses of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I don't think we will be able to do much on the problems of bureaucracy or these are very long-term problems and not easy to address in the short period.
Okay. Do you find that there is a feeling now that you're sort of emerging from the lockdown, that people are beginning to, entrepreneurs are beginning to spy opportunities and take advantage?
Yes, I think yes. As Diego just mentioned, this is a peculiar crisis compared with the previous crisis, because one of the main characteristics is that you have a lot of sectors. We are in a complete lockdown, but at the same time you have a lot of opportunities, especially for the new sectors associated with, for example, the use of the internet. So we had a boom in the online marketplaces and personal deliveries, etc., etc. So, and I think that the entrepreneurs reacted very, very quickly, especially the case of small, and this is certainly a good sign of the ability of the entrepreneurial ecosystem to react very quickly, certainly much quicker than the government in some way.
Well, I mean, it's really great to hear that the entrepreneurial spirit is still there in Italy, a country renowned, after all, for its entrepreneurs. But the same could be said of Spain, right? Isidro, could we move to you? And can you actually talk from the Spanish perspective on the characteristics of this COVID-19 crisis that make it different to the other crisis that you were talking about earlier?
Well, we can we can take two dimensions. The first one is time, and the other one is intensity. And they're very different in all dimensions. The 2008 crisis was mainly a debt crisis, which sparked a liquidity shortage that mostly strangled SMEs and freelancers, forcing close-ups or sale of many viable businesses, right, and then hitting the labor market. All this through maybe a 4 to 5 time period, right? Right. Very differently, the COVID crisis is a paralysis and uncertainty crisis. It is being very intense. Within a few weeks, everything has to be redefined and has to be readdressed. It has stalled and blocked the economy, disrupting the normal functioning of the productive sector and causing business close-ups, as we shall see later, job losses, drop in consumption, drop in GNP, suddenly, drop in tax collections, increase in public spending, and therefore an increasing public deficit, which very probably will bring some social unrest within the next few months and maybe years. So they are absolutely different in intensity and impact.
Sure. I mean, I think the message is really clear. This is a crisis like no other, you know, right, that any other person, any person out there in terms of their lives have not experienced such a crisis. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it's actually very difficult to really feel what might be coming. What are Spanish entrepreneurs telling us? You know, I know that you've actually carried out some work on trying to understand, you know, how the entrepreneurs are reacting. So Over to
Right.
you. Yeah.
As you know, Spain is one of the earliest members in GEM network. We are a team of 100 researchers in 17 groups in all Spanish regions, and we work very coordinately. So, sensitive to this situation, Spain GEM network conducted an online questionnaire during the second half of last April. We had more than 4,000 answers from entrepreneurs all over the country, which allowed us to take the pulse on the impact of COVID on the entrepreneurial fabric. So this is a nice initiative. We have analyzed the data. We're still working on it and doing some diffusion, but I will bring some information, please, my colleagues have collected for me to share with you. Forrest, please, next slide. As you can see, during the lockdown, telework is having an unexpected positive impact compared to the normal functioning of the economy, putting it in the center map of innovation in business processes. This is straight from the entrepreneur's opinions. There has been also a significant drop in demand, going to zero in 32% of cases and notably reduced in 42% of cases, another hit as well. Many companies are, anyway, changing business models or adapting tight cost reduction measures to survive, because it's a matter of survival. This affects laborers and suppliers, mostly reducing activity, wages, prices all along the value chain in different industries. Financial stress is also a burden, especially looking for short-term solutions to increase survival. Obviously, these circumstances, as it was the case of Italy, have affected differently in different sectors, depending also on company size, territory, and local circumstances, as we mentioned before. Looking into the future, Forrest, please, next slide. At first sight, the first message about the near future is that almost 80% of interviewees anticipate a very negative to somewhat negative scenario, which is really pessimistic future. They also show worries about how long the lockdown will last and which effect it will have on their jobs and the fear to close their businesses. So the pressure to survive is very intensive. There is also a tense uncertainty about the future due to the lack of a clear support strategy on the side of public institutions in which they are losing their confidence. This obviously affects investment decisions, which surprisingly are dropping more moderately than we would expect. This is maybe because of the optimistic and worried actors of entrepreneurs. Probably this is happening because the entrepreneurs are doing investments to redefine their business models or to adapt their facilities to the physical work requirements imposed by the COVID circumstances and the regulations related to it. So looking into the future, we are very satisfied to confirm once again that entrepreneurial drive is a compelling force of mankind, particularly in bad times. It's a lesson we have detected in our study. Thus, we find that new market opportunities are being detected, both to adapt to new situations and to take advantage of it. The main burden is obviously the need of capital investment, and entrepreneurs look up for public institutions to provide short-term financing to keep their businesses alive while moving toward a new scenery. Some of the initiatives adopted so far are related to launching new products and services, close alliances with clients, or even find new markets. The fast recovery of the productive fabric under the current situation obviously depends heavily on the support from public administrations and monetary institutions. But the attitude is positive and enduring.
Well, I mean, that is, there's some optimism definitely in there, right?
Yeah.
And now the other thing that GEM Spain is engaged in is ecosystem research, looking specifically at city ecosystems. And I know, given your involvement, personal involvement, Isidro.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the observed and or expected impact at the local level, and what they look like?
Well, this is a very complex question to answer in a few minutes.
Yeah, you can give us a little flavor. A little flavor.
It is obvious. Thank you. Well, I'll give it a try. Each territory needs a specific custom-made strategy, aligned with local institutions and their role to foster solutions based on consensus with all the agents in the ecosystem in order to exploit local competitive advantages. Yeah. At a larger scale, I anticipate a shift toward more technology-intensive processes, such as robotics, AI, mobile business, both to reduce high personal contact jobs, which is something aimed at preventing from COVID expansion, and in order to achieve low-cost competitive production, maybe to relocate activities that are now currently developed somewhere else in the Far East. I also anticipate a faster shift toward internet-based business models and collaborative models to reduce fixed and labor cost. This is a decisive push toward circular economy and sustainable production. The lockdown territories and a decrease in average income may also set a trend toward the consumption of local production, particularly food, leisure, apparel, tourism, culture, and similar issues. Besides, I think there will be a redefinition of globalization as we know it so far. Logistic channels will redefine to decrease foreign dependence on critical goods and probably to diversify suppliers, particularly in food, health, and other strategic products. So we are facing a shift, a hinge leap into our economic and social and trade model.
Okay, and with that in mind, I mean, do you, can you maybe talk specifically about Madrid, where you carried out substantial work on that particular entrepreneurial ecosystem in 2019? How different will 2020 look for Madrid? And are there positives on the horizon for that city?
Well, Madrid has always been a melting pot of all kinds of influences. So everything and everyone is welcome and finds a place. So I hope that our regional identity and flexibility will be strengthened and motivated, and hope our regional government is capable to align that energy into a common project based on our local competitive advantages. Today, as we concluded in our regional ecosystem study, Madrid ranks 5th or 6th amongst the main entrepreneurial ecosystems in Europe. And the COVID crisis was maybe surely lead us to give the best of us. So I am quite optimistic. I see innovations coming in all terms of the economic and the productive fabric, particularly in professional services, education, proximity trade, clean energy, mobility. But I also anticipate an increased development of the civil society via social entrepreneurship, as community groups are organizing or assuming an active role to address inequality, the needs of the needy, and other social disequilibrium. It is happening now. Some of my colleagues are going to food organizations to provide the needy with food packages. And, well, I won't go further into that. In summary, in Madrid and in many other places in Europe and the world, we shall witness a spiral of technological and social innovation, which might bring a new leap forward for the region and eventually for humankind in case it happens in many other places.
So again, rather kind of optimistic, sort of, yes, there's change, there's some very good change ahead, some really critical change, and probably overdue change in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I turn to the to Gem Italy, and I mean, governments have a very important role here. It's really crucial that as everything returns to, well, what is now called the so-called new normal, that the policy response be the right response in order to stimulate entrepreneurship, generate entrepreneurs, etc. So can you, can either Donato or you, Diego, speak about the current and potential policy remedies that are being put in place or could be put in place in order to avert the worst impacts with recovery in mind?
Yes, Aileen, you are absolutely right. The role of government in these circumstances is very important. But I also absolutely share the idea of Isidro about the importance of entrepreneurial activity. So let me let me expand on these two aspects. When we think at the role of government, I think this is a positive difference with the 2009 crisis that we the reaction by national government, by the EU, by the EU institutions was very, very quick and I think much more effective than what happened in the 2009 crisis. So we learned something on how to react, and the governments and EU institutions learned something. And so the reaction now is much more quick and effective. Today is a special day in Italy, not only because we are reopening right today most of the activities after 2 months of lockdown, but also because the Italian government just approved a very, very unprecedented in terms of magnitude, what is called the Relaunch Act, mobilizing almost 155 billion euros to not only to react to this the immediate situation, but also to try and relaunch activities. And as I said before, I absolutely share with Isidro the idea that the entrepreneurial activity will be absolutely crucial for the recovery after this crisis. As we said, we need to mobilize resources from one sector to another. As you mentioned, things will not just return to normal. We have to make a lot of adaptations. Firms has to make a lot of adaptations and innovations, and so the role of entrepreneurship will be crucial. And of course, when we look at the government intervention, this time I'm commenting on the Italian act. You see, one of the critics is that you see a lot of resources invested in just as a defensive, I will say, defensive measures to try and cope with the present situation in terms of unemployment, or trying to help firms to survive. As Isidro mentioned, this is one of the main problems especially for small and smaller firms. But I also, on the positive side, I can also mention that within this act there are specific measures to sustain innovative startups, and try to improve and foster the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Italy. So there are specific measures to sustain the investment of innovative startups, especially those arising around universities and new technologies, and also specific measure to sustain the other actors of the ecosystem, like incubators and venture capitalists. These are weaknesses in Italy if we compare with other countries. So maybe the magnitude of we wanted the magnitude of resources to be more than that. But I understand that governments at the moment are very much worried about the immediate consequences of the crisis. So most of the investment and most of the resources are inevitably devoted to sustain the firms and people. But there's an attention on the role of entrepreneurs, and especially innovative entrepreneurs in the months to come. Microphone, Aileen.
Yes, beg your pardon, I had switched off for better sound, but I want to ask Isidro to maybe give us a perspective from Spain on exactly the same question, the policy responses from Spain, current potential, what does the future look like as economies restart?
Okay, so far the Spanish government seems to be prioritizing health over the economic recovery. This means that GNP is expected to drop somewhere between 6 to 9 to 10%, and unemployment might rise up to 30%, 35%, according to some independent analysts, with a loss of 900,000 companies within the near future. The economic measures taken so far have been quite limited compared to other countries, as is the case of Italy and other European partners. So far, those measures basically imply a future reimbursement of taxes collected during the lockdown period, soft loans subject to stiff bureaucratic procedures, and a temporary wage subsidy for those companies not firing the employees during the pandemic. There's still not a medium and long range strategy. Thus, this is something that someone is working on, but we have seen no final outcome and no final proposition. I deeply trust the business and the social sectors to take over recovery aligned with local institutions, local governments, municipalities, etc. All these within the guidelines and resources set up at the government, central government, and maybe the European government. All this align with a strategy that we still don't have. Hopefully, we expect an effective reaction before the economic crisis that will hover above us in the next months will revamp the health crisis, triggering a vicious circle nobody wants to think about. So because if you don't have an economic running, health problems will arise, and that is a vicious circle we don't want to get into. We still, therefore, have no strategy so far, except intentions, right? And short-term measures.
Right, well-intentioned intentions, I hope. And I mean, so I would like to invite people who are out there listening to already start putting some questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them in a few minutes' time. Just make sure you put your questions in the Q&A and not the chat. And I hope to give over maybe quarter of an hour, a little bit more, to answering those questions. But just as a wrap up, could you, Donato or Diego, the Gem Italy team, could you talk about this year's research? Because we took some time to adjust our research instruments so that they could be COVID-19 impact relevant. So I'm just wondering, what are the questions that you would really like answers to through the research, the GEM research this year? Thank you.
I don't know whether Diego will say something. I think let me say something more on Italy, because of course in this short time there's so many and as you know, Italy is in terms of there's a lot of territorial differences of the country. So in terms of entrepreneurial ecosystems, we must think at the
Donato, I have a lot of interference on your line. I wonder whether you can either put on the earphones. You might have some available, but it's not possible for me. And
you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I hear you, but there's a lot of interference. Let's see if it continues. Okay.
Okay. If you can hear me, yes. So as you mentioned, Aileen, this year survey of the entrepreneurial activity by GEM will be especially important, because of what we were saying with Isidro about the importance of how the entrepreneurs will react to the crisis, and because of the importance of entrepreneurial activity. So we very much look forward to this year survey, not only to see whether what would be the impact on entrepreneurial activity, but also the impact on the motivation of people to start new businesses. And whether some of the characteristics of these new businesses will change in terms of, for example, the motivation to grow and the difference between, if there are differences between what we call, opportunity entrepreneurship rather than necessity entrepreneurship. I think that it's given the uncertainty about the situation that Isidro was mentioning, it is very difficult to make expectations, because on one side it's possible that we will observe a rise in necessity entrepreneurship motivated by the high rates of unemployment that we are expecting. But at the same time, as we discussed, there will be a lot of new opportunities for innovation and change. So it's not easy to predict what will happen in terms of the share between opportunity and necessity, and that's one of the reasons why I think this year's survey will be particularly important for understanding the characteristics of what's going on entrepreneurs, and for policymakers to design effective policies to sustain entrepreneurs. So we very much look forward on the results of the GEM survey this year.
Thank you. And Isidro, can you literally within 1 minute do a wrap up on what your expectations are, if there are quite some differences there for you?
I basically coincide with Donato's viewpoint about what to expect from the next fieldwork. Maybe there will be some bias, and we'll have some new information, because the situation will somehow have cooled down, and we shall probably on the track to recovery, and we can look into the future with more perspective. We really want to have information to analyze the motivation underlying the nascent entrepreneurial activity, and also what are the reasons behind close-ups, what is motivating entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, which is happening in these emerging areas of the entrepreneurship phenomenon. We also want to have the experts' opinion about what do they think about these public policy measures that hopefully will come into effect and will start having an impact? Overall, we are also very satisfied with the specific COVID study we conducted a few weeks ago, and we shall probably in the meantime go for another round and have information to compare, hot information with information about the perceptions during the opening up of the economy. This is all, Aileen. Thank you very much. Micro, please. Microphone. Aileen, okay.
You know, can I just ask you for us to go to the last slide there? On the one hand, I'm just going to give you a minute or so. We have about 60 people online. Please do ask your questions on the Q&A part of the webinar. You just roll over the bottom of your screen and you'll see there's a Q&A there. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. In the meantime, as you put your questions in, just if there's anyone out there that is not currently part of a GEM team, but might be in academia or in research and would be interested in hearing about starting a national team in their country, please do be in contact with us on the email that's provided there on this slide. Also, you've heard from Isidro about the work that GEM Spain has been doing on ecosystems. It's really interesting. If you're interested in a particular ecosystem, whether that be a region or a city, a local area, where you might be interested in assessing ecosystem readiness for entrepreneurs. And this is also something that we do. And we're also always interested in partnerships and sponsoring organizations that might be interested in getting together with us to promote entrepreneurship through issuing special reports, etc. So now I'm going to turn to the questions. And I see that there are mostly questions in the chat, but so the first question I have here is, what do you think will be the role of academia in supporting SMEs during the recovery stage of this crisis, I guess? Who would like to take that? Perhaps you can look at that. Perhaps Diego, Diego, you haven't spoken for a bit.
Sure, thank you for the question. Well, academia, I think, has a leading role in terms of supporting and boosting entrepreneurial activity in a country, of course. But at least in the short run, for what concerns the crisis, I think the main support that academia can give is by doing research, probably related to health issues, and supporting the changes in the SMEs in terms of innovation and automation. So try to modernize and change business models in the short run. Of course, in the long run, it's a matter also of education. Academia has to support entrepreneurial education. But this will be in the long run, of course, and in order to have increasing entrepreneurial activity, but not to at least not to respond in the short run to the crisis. That's what I think.
I have a quite interesting, thank you, Diego, question here. It's, you know, as we kind of go back to this so-called new normal, there's been a lot of sort of discussion on whether we will approach business differently with more purpose-driven goals. And so here's the question. What do you think about the priority of goals amongst firms? Do they consider environmental goals ahead of business goal profit? And how can we encourage them to consider environmental goals as important as business goals? So, Isidro, would you
Well,
like to?
I'll take it.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
toughie, right?
Yeah, it's a challenging question. Well,
Yeah.
I think that business professionals, especially younger people and young entrepreneurs, are very sensitive to environmental issues. And a new code of ethics is arising. This will be somehow pushed up by the COVID crisis, and many companies are also getting involved in helping society to come out and go through this pandemic. We have seen in Spain how many corporations are taking individual initiatives to help the public health service, transportation, provide easy financing for families, etc. So I think that this pandemic will reinforce the compromise of corporations with sustainability, with social responsibility, but felt social responsibility with compromise, and will align with the civil society in projects that will definitely ease the impact of this situation in all the levels of society. So I see a change in this attitude on the side of companies.
I think that's very encouraging. We have a rather technical question that's from Alicia, who's in our network with GEM. Do you think that Italy and Spain will show similar reactions in terms of entrepreneurial activity this cycle? And also a follow-up question, will relevant ecosystems in both countries resist the crisis better compared to other zones within the countries? So that's a double question.
Yes, a double question, yeah.
Who would like to attempt entrepreneurial activity? Perhaps Donato, would you like to look at that?
As Isidro mentioned before, one of the main characteristics of this crisis is uncertainty. So so it's very, very difficult to make predictions on what will happen, and that's why also it is so important what Isidro and the Spain team is making on continuously monitoring the situation, because that will be very very important. I think that as we said, this is a very, as you said, this is a crisis like no other. So I don't expect to see much similarities with the previous crisis. Right. Maybe we will see much more disruption in terms of closures of activities than in the previous crisis, and hopefully this will be counterbalanced by an even more boosting in new firms. That's the expectation, or at least our hope, that we will see more closure, but also more new companies in new sectors maybe, or as Isidro was mentioning, with a new attitude towards societal challenges and environmental challenges. So that's the, I was, to the second question, I was just mentioning before that, yes, there are big territorial differences within our countries, in Italy as well as in Spain. And what we think and what we fear in some way is that the main ecosystems, for example, in Italy, like Milan, or the other main cities like Madrid in Spain, they will be more able to react. And so one of the fear is that after the crisis, the territorial differences will increase. So that's, of course, this is good news for the main entrepreneurial ecosystems, but it's a bad news for the country overall, because when territorial differences increase, there are also political problems in some ways.
Or a little bit an entrepreneurial gap, in other words,
yeah.
New kind of gap.
It's possible that this gap will increase.
Yes, yes, sure. And contribute maybe to other gaps that are already existing.
Yeah. So also one question was about the female versus male entrepreneurs, and this is another aspect in which differences could increase rather than decrease. Okay. Because we already have analysis that the lockdown that we are experiencing are affecting very much more female in our countries than male. So it could be that this could the crisis will affect differently male and female entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. Isidro, is there anything from your survey of entrepreneurs that indicates this?
Just to make a few points on Donato's general opinion, I agree with you, Donato. I understand, and there will be geographical differences, but they depend on the economic background of each territory. In Spain, we have the northwest, which is more industry-oriented and high value-added services-oriented. And then we have the southeast, which is rather procyclical activities oriented, which is tourism, construction, upholstery, etc. If there is this region, this area of Spain will be dependent on tourism and these activities that are mostly conditioned to the European, just to simplify it, because we have tourists from many other countries, having the money to come to Spain and spend the vacation time. So there will be a two-speed development process, but we are optimistic in the end because we have highly qualified business people. The main problem is how small their companies are, the low capacity of investment they have, but they are people enduring and willing to work and to overcome difficulties. So I am reasonably optimistic, but the time lapse of recovery will be different as well. That it will make a difference.
Okay, very interesting. Actually, we have a question that was asked much earlier, but in the chat. Do we see, or are we seeing, a turn from internationalization, I guess globalization, in the current crisis? I think the media is increasingly indicating there is this turn. But the question is, does this present an opportunity, do you feel, for entrepreneurial firms to focus on local responsiveness, local supply chains, etc.? Maybe Diego, would you like to try on that one?
That's a difficult question, actually. I mean, we hope so. That's what I can say. Of course, the crisis may affect supply chain in the sense of we talked before about the one-third of firms in Italy. I mean, having difficulties and stopping producing. So this, of course, will affect the supply chain at the local level, at the international level as well. So, of course, it may happen that this part of the supply chain may be substituted by local entrepreneurs coming in and try to fill the gap. That's what we may expect. especially if this stop in the supply chain will last long and will be caused by cessation. About the local, it can happen. That's
Yeah, I think the jury is still out, as they say. The jury is still deciding what's actually going to happen. I'm going to wrap up because we've run out of time. Just to say one last thing, we do have a question here. Can we not develop a high-level quick check on ecosystem dynamics that will inform entrepreneurial support and response, as many small businesses could fail quickly? So, you know, GEM is all about that. Actually diagnosing the problem and coming up with some remedies. If you'd like to look at our website, you'll find our global report, and you'll find a plethora of information there on exactly just that, kind of how do you carry out a diagnostic on an ecosystem at a national level, to be honest. We also, as I mentioned earlier, can do that at a city or a regional level. So do be in contact. I know we got a range of other questions. They're very important to us. We will be writing reports in the future. We'll be looking at your questions, and there will be future webinars. I'd like to mention to you that our next webinar on 1st of June will be focusing on USA. So that's an important one, and possibly Canada. We'll confirm that to you very, very shortly. So I need to wrap up, and I need to say thank you very much, Donato, Diego, Isidro. It's been a really fascinating journey with you on looking at, you know, the current situation and the future. It's been excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And goodbye to everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Don't hesitate to be in touch with us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.